I have just been watching and linked below to two videos by a woman whose YouTube name is Miss Jane. Looking at her videos, which have lovely editing, some lovely photography work, and some speedy and slow motion stuff. Also, she moves out of black and white and colour, and she moves out of silence and sound. She has a lovely original approach to editing her videos, whereas I sit here talking into a microphone with no video and I just put a PowerPoint JPEG in front of it because I'm lazy. But anyway, Thomas Sheridan earlier, well, yesterday now on Wednesday, now past midnight. We're all midnight types of people, aren't we? I always come into my best after midnight. But Thomas Sheridan yesterday, Wednesday, put a link on Twitter to Miss Jane's video in which she talks about masks. And then she put up a video yesterday, she printed it yesterday, in relation to her response to Thomas Sheridan. Now, she talks in the second video about paganism, and in the first video she talks about masks. And it's just like listening to my own thoughts being played back to me. That's about as accurate as I can say. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that, because, with the internet, when you make new friends or make new contacts, people can be manic and say, "Oh, where have you been?" And but actually, her thoughts on paganism and her thoughts on the mask thing are absolutely where I stand on those two things. I believe that the notion of masks being mandatory for people to buy their groceries is evil. Anybody who's been following my channel since August knows exactly where I stand on that one. Religion, paganism, is a private thing. People who proselytize, people who go out and tub thump about their religion are immediately suspect. Your religion is yours, it's not anybody else's. What Miss Jane says about paganism, though, is right. There's no Messiah. And there's no rules. There isn't 10 commandments. You will see these crazy people who say, "Oh, I'm a pagan, I'm a neo-pagan." And in fact, what they are really is they're just replacing one Abrahamic label with another. Abrahamic religion is about rules and a big sky fairy who's going to get cross with you if you don't stick by the sky fairy's rules. That's not paganism, guys. Sorry. Paganism really is recognizing that there's magic out there, that there is something beyond us. But it's recognizing also that the notion of trying to put it down in a book like the Bible or the Quran or the Talmud, that's not going to work, because it is beyond us. It's bigger than us. We cannot analyze it in the terms that we analyze our day-to-day existence, the way you'd write a rule book, the way you'd write statute. Religion doesn't work that way. And paganism most certainly doesn't work that way. One of the greatest or worst sacrileges of paganism is meddling. I've come across that myself, and I've realised how evil it is to meddle. Even the courts, particularly I think in Ireland even more than the UK, the courts take a really, really hard view on people who meddle in litigation which you're not a party to. You can always apply to be made a notice party to a case. I did that successfully in 2020, a planning case in South Dublin. I applied and was granted an order to be made a notice party, so I'm not meddling. That's the only way you can get involved in people's litigation, unless you start a case yourself. Here I am back talking about the courts and law again. Hey, I'm like a cracked record. Miss Jane is talking about masks and how she and her husband are private people. Yes, it is an invasion of privacy, isn't it? I hadn't really thought about it on those lines, but it is. I want to go to the shops and buy my milk and buy my bread for my elderly parents who I live with. Mum will be 91 in April, Dad will be 92 in November coming. I want to do that, to buy our essential things, our food, our toiletries, toilet paper, that kind of thing. Razors for myself. All of those various different bits and pieces, without having this imposition put on me. It's such a liberty what they've done and what they're doing to people. But what Miss Jane talks about, I don't know her real name, I'm going by her YouTube handle here. She talks about the harassment she gets in the shops. Oh, listen, I'll tell you about it. Except I think hearing other people's stories, including hers, other people in Ireland, the level of harassment that I have received in the shops has been a fraction of what most other people who are not wearing masks have received. This is due in part to the fact that Mr. Litigious here went about it the right way in terms of staying clear with the law. I wrote to the Chief of Police for Dublin. I said, I'm not wearing a mask. It's enforced medical intervention. It's unconstitutional. And then later on, about 2 weeks ago, I said, there's no need on my part to have medical certification anyway. And I also, in relation to the shops I go to locally, I wrote to many of them or spoke to their managers and said, is it okay for me to come without a mask? They all said, yeah, that's fine. I suppose that's a pagan thing as well. Don't look for trouble. Treat people with respect. Because, I don't know what Miss Jane's opinion in this will be, but I can assume it. A lot of the people working in shops are just doing it to bring in enough money to keep themselves, to keep body and soul together. I'm thinking of the people I've encountered, the staff I've encountered in shops. I haven't had any trouble. I haven't had any trouble. Really, seriously, I haven't had any trouble in the shops. What is it about me? Is it paganism or what? I mean, what's happening? I haven't had any trouble in the shops, not from the staff. I have had some grief, would you believe, from a certain type of man. No woman has ever said anything to me. But it is a certain specific type of man has harassed me over not wearing a mask. And indeed, one man called the Gardaí on me on not wearing a mask. So I waited in the supermarket. The management at the shop told him I had permission not to wear a mask, and he ignored them and called the Gardaí down. And when they came down, the management at the shop told the Gardaí that this was frivolous and vexatious and that I had permission not to wear a mask. So they cautioned the man for wasting police time. And then they escorted him off the premises. This was on a busy Saturday, just before Christmas, when two beat Gardaí had far better things to be doing than dealing with and pandering to one man's vendetta. So, you know, she talks about a lot of interesting things, and how, as Thomas says, she reinforces what Thomas says. I've said it as well. These times have been hard for many. They haven't been as hard for me as for most others. I have to be thankful for that. I have to be very thankful for that. But these have been hard times for a lot of people. They've been very stressful times for a lot of people. A lot of people find this carry-on of having to wear a mask to the shops very upsetting. I've spoken to people like that. I spoke to a woman in August, or it's last year sometime, in which she started crying. She said, I hate wearing this thing, don't do it. I said, she said, I'll get into trouble. Not if I come in with you. I said, nobody will dare harass you if I come in with you. Oh, no. She said, I'm not. She didn't even want to have to go into the shop with me. She just didn't want anything to be changed in the routine that she'd spent her life doing. You know, going to the shop, buying the milk, the rashers, that kind of thing. How dare the people calling the shots now treat this woman that way? How dare they? How dare they? What? This is such a liberty to take with a law-abiding elderly woman who got distraught over the fact that she didn't want to wear a mask across her face when she was going to buy her food. How dare they? These evil, twisted, vicious, sadistic scumbags do that to that old woman. Because not everybody would have the way I am, just to say, no, this is not in my case, guys. Sorry, this is not happening in my case. And I thought back to August of 2020, when the mask thing apparently became mandatory here in Ireland. Then you read through the law and realise that there's so many bloody loopholes in it that it's not enforceable. Despite the lies that are coming from the filth in the mainstream media. They won't talk about me. They won't talk about how I had the Gardaí called on me and nothing happened. Down came the police and next, nothing happened. I remember being aware, I suppose it's a pagan thing and a magic thing as well, in August. Just saying, it's okay, because I'm just not going to wear a mask. It wasn't an option. It wasn't a case of saying, well, is there a chance that somebody might try and force me to wear a mask, or might I get into trouble? My starting point was, I'm not wearing a mask. Everything else followed from that. Then I made up, I didn't make up anything. No. I made up nothing. I then went and found my medical excuse. That was my gingivitis and my bacteria breath is a very valid reason for me not to wear a mask. There you go. So I sought a medical certificate in January of this year, 2021, and I was told that there was no need for it because the law states that you don't have to show medical proof. So it's a hoax. It's a hoax. It's rubbish. People are saying, the free men in the land are saying, oh, it's not real law, it's not real statute. No, it is real statute. It's just when you read through the statute, you realise that the real statute actually has no legs. It's encouraging to come across the likes of Thomas Sheridan, of course, to come across the likes of Dave Cullen over here, to come across the likes of Miss Jane, and to realise that we're the sane ones. We're the sane ones. I was talking to somebody when I got morning coffee up in Hoth Harbour this morning. We're on lockdown here, but we're lucky. Miss Jane seems to live in a nice part of England. It looks like, I'm taking a guess, I'm probably wrong, it looks Durham way. It looks really nice where she lives, actually. It looks northern, kind of further north of England, that older part and more remote part, heading up towards kind of maybe Newcastle. I live somewhere not too dissimilar to it, and we're lucky exactly where our home is. We've lots of space. I have my own office here, my own studio. She's just like me. I had to leave the phone in the bedroom because all the chimes go off. In her second video, it's full of these chimes that are going off. Oh, look, I empathise. How many of my videos have my phone going off, or me getting emails, in the middle of it? But it's encouraging. It's so encouraging to come across all of these people. I say that seriously and earnestly. I'm not doing an internet love bombing thing to her. She may want her privacy. She may not want necessarily to join up with us. But I want her to know one thing. I want her to know that we're out here and that we support what she's doing. She may decide not to get involved with that kind of thing. That's entirely her decision, and I respect it entirely. But I do want, if I do nothing else, to let Miss Jane know how strongly I, and so many of us in this group here in Ireland, totally agree with what she said. I mean, 100% agree with everything she said in those two videos. I mean 100% agree with everything she said in those two videos. Spindly little men politicians, these things that look like they stepped out of a goddamn swamp, laying down the law to big burly men who prance around supermarkets wearing a mask. Are you kidding me? Please. Are we in insane times? I was having my coffee anyway, sorry I've digressed. I was talking there about having coffee in Hoth. I go up to Hoth every morning or early afternoon. I've been doing a lot of gym lately, actually. A friend of mine has been helping me address a shoulder injury. And it's interesting, this shoulder injury is kind of a rotator cuff thing. We have a gym in the house here. And he said to me, when you are doing your weightlifting again, make sure that your elbows are completely in balance with each other and symmetrical like a mirror. So I did it, and I found the weakness and pain in my left arm after a 4-year injury was unbelievable. So I'm going back to square one now with my gym routine, and I won't embarrass him by giving his name here. He knows who he is. He'll hear this in the video, and I'm very grateful to him. He sent me links to a number of YouTube videos. I downloaded them. I put them onto one video. I'm going to put them onto a DVD and look at them in the gym. I didn't realise I was so badly injured in my left arm. My hand has now begun to spasm, and I've been getting numbness in certain fingers that actually he knew exactly the fingers I'd get them in, would you believe? He seems to be a very good physical trainer. But I've digressed a bit, haven't I? Miss Jane seems to live in quite a nice, a little bit more remote area. So, to an extent, do I with my mum and dad here in Dublin. We're out at the fringes of things here. It's great. We've very big grounds to our house. My parents can have a walk in private anytime they want. Nobody's going to bother us. There's a beach behind us. We're spoilt rotten and we're blessed. We are blessed. And I give thanks, and indeed my mother. There's not a day goes by in this lockdown where Mum and I haven't said to each other, aren't we so lucky to have what we have here? Because how many poor people don't have that? Like that poor woman who got distraught about being made to wear a mask. That's not her fault. That's not her fault. It's the fault of these swamp monsters who have just suddenly gone on this binge in 2020. This deranged lunatic binge that they've gone on. But what is so telling is the amount of them who've fallen in with this. Like that person who called the Gardaí on me, and the poor. Yeah, there's also the people in between who just don't want to get into trouble when they go to the supermarket. No, they hate wearing a mask. But they're not going to take on the system. They're not to be blamed for that. They're not to be blamed for that. What Miss Jane says is that she never liked taking orders from anybody. Yeah, you got it. You got it. I hated secondary school for that particular reason. I hated the stupid rules and the self-righteousness and the sanctimoniousness of this old boys fee-paying school my parents sent me to. Of course, it follows naturally that I would go ahead and train as a secondary teacher. Well, I mean, really. 11 years I worked as a secondary teacher because I could control the kids. And there's a reason why I could control the kids. One, I focused on getting them good exam results. I didn't focus on being their friend or being enlightening. No thanks. I focused on just getting good exam results. That's all. That's good enough for me. Because I remember when I was a student teacher, there was one of the mentoring teachers I was under, lovely lady actually. She was the real hard teacher in the school. Of course, obviously she and I ended up becoming the best friends. But she got great results and everybody respected her for that. And she was the teacher they all talked about. I said, yeah, I want to be that teacher. I want to be the one who gets the great results. Secondly, when I was in secondary school, I remember there was a teacher called Stripper. And we all called him Stripper because he'd one leg shorter than the other. So his clothes used to go both on him when he'd walk up the corridor. So he'd look like he was a stripper. Ah, God, we all loved poor old Stripper, except for the fact that everybody went completely mental in his class all the time. He was one of the few teachers, he'd walk into the classroom and things got noisier. And I always said, and then I noticed when I became a teacher, I never had a permanent job, although I taught in one school for a year, I taught in another school for half a year. Every single school I taught in, there was a stripper. Not literally, but there was a teacher like Stripper, who was the joke teacher of the school. Every single secondary school I taught in, there was one teacher at least who was the comic turn for all the kids. And you'd wait for this particular teacher to come in. I remember it in secondary school. It was the highlight of the day to have his class. Oh, we used to go bananas in his class. All the way up to 6th year when we were all like 16 and 17 and 18. We used to swing out of the ceiling in his classroom. And I said, oh, no. When I was training as a teacher, my big ambition was never, ever in any secondary school I ever taught in would I be the stripper at the school. And I wasn't. But I do remember the other teachers who, you'd observe the way I got to a point after about 3 or 4 years as a secondary teacher, because I was only ever a temp, mainly. I mean, I was a long-term temp in some schools. But it got to a point after about 4 years of teaching, as I said, the trajectory ran for 11 years. So by the end of those 11 years, I was highly experienced. I'm digressing with what I say next. For 1 year, I had my own job at an extremely rough boys' school in Dublin. I don't have a classist attitude to the kids I teach. They may be boys, they may be girls, they may be rich, they may be poor, they may be black, white, blue, green, whatever. I taught in a totally even-handed way. It was a very deliberate policy of mine. And every single class I taught, now this is concomitant to their aptitude, because some kids just have a higher literacy standard and a higher comprehension standard than others. I always made sure that I was teaching them to the best of my ability and doing the best I could in respect of their actual specific ability. But I taught in this very rough boys' school in Dublin. I had no problem with the boys. But it was a very poorly managed school, and eventually I left. I didn't like the other teachers much. There were some of the teachers I had great regard for, actually. I remember there was a religion teacher in the school who was a real conservative, devout Catholic. Of course, that teacher and I ended up becoming the best of friends, me being gay and pro-choice. Of course. But we did, because that particular teacher was full of courage. Because, you can have loads of courage when Basically, Jesus is your guardian as far as this person was concerned. But I do recall something. I was unhappy in that school, so I planned my classes very, very strictly, and I made sure I was always prepared. I kept my classroom very clean, because a lot of the other teachers had their classrooms like a dump. So I made it, it was a visible thing I did to my colleagues to show them, you keep your classrooms like a tip head if you want to. I'm keeping mine spotlessly clean and tidy. I kept it together to an extent by doing those particular things. But I worked for another 5 years as a teacher after I left that school. Oh, I was delighted to be finished with that place. But, and this is the point that I'm making, after I finished in that school, when I started teaching again the following September, I went back to being a temp. Yes, I was delighted. I loved being a temp teacher. It was great crack being a temp teacher, because you could go in and make an absolute mess of everything, and nobody, just, oh, who's just the temp, sorry. But on many occasions I was so much better than the teachers I was temping for. But that's not hard. I'm not boasting by saying that, really, if you know how secondary teachers tick. How many teachers are mental? How many teachers do you recall were mental? Absolutely, totally gaga. Very dark thing, teaching. I'm digressing and I'm waffling. I apologise. I went in September of 2007. I started back temping again. And I noticed immediately that when I would walk into a classroom with 30 kids in it, in some occasions, who might have been 15, 14, 16, might have been all boys, I would walk in, I'd walk up to the front of the room, and by the time I got to the front of the room, they'd be sitting down and they'd be silent. That happened to me every single class I walked into for the remainder of my career. It got to a point where I was called to a meeting of the principals and year heads in a school, where they frankly asked me, what's the secret? Well, I said, if I knew, it wouldn't be a secret. No, come on, they said, what do you think it is, honestly? And I said to them, I taught in a very rough school for a year. I said, and I held it together. That's it, they said. And I remember these were teachers these were school, the principal and deputy principal called me aside in one school, and they said, what are you doing? How are you doing this? These are classes that have run wild for the teachers in the school. You walk in and they go. And I analysed it much later. I've talked about Mrs. Carmody in The Mist. Great film. When you have that inside yourself, you don't need to worry about what's outside. This may interest you to hear this. I never shouted. I qualified in 2002 and started working immediately. But around 2005, I watched a documentary about a brat camp in America. Now, some of those brat camps are bloody awful places, but this seemed to be quite a conscientiously run place. And it was run by Buddhists, and their staff were former US Marines, and they had a very strict rule that they never raised their voice. And I said to myself, when I watched the documentary, I said, I'll never raise my voice in a classroom again, and I never did. And it transformed the way that I taught. Now, that was before I went to the rough school in Dublin, but I think that that's what got me through the rough school in Dublin. I never raised my voice. Because I remember when I was in secondary school, if you could get a teacher wound up, sure, it was better than cabaret. Detention, well worth it. Well worth it for the cabaret, for the comedy value of getting a particular teacher absolutely off their chump in front of you. I mean, it used to be so funny. It used to. I didn't like secondary school, but when we would go wild on teachers, I have to say, it was one of the kind of consoling moments of when I was in school. It was like the hunter turned gamekeeper that I became a secondary teacher. I'm not joking, it really was like the hunter turned gamekeeper. Maybe I was set out for those 11 years in secondary teaching. I'm not going to go back to it. That's really fallen apart, that whole state of affairs. I've rambled here, haven't I? But Miss Jane has these 2 brilliant videos. They're both linked below. Please give them a watch. Please give them a subscribe. Like her, follow her, share her. She talks so much sense. She talks so much sense about the mask thing. She talks so much sense about her privacy and her desire to maintain her privacy. That's it as well. Okay, I do all these videos here, but like herself, both my parents and I are private people. And people would say, well, what are you private about? Well, that's private, isn't it?